Good morning, I am Kevin Price. Delighted to be with you. Going to spend some time talking to you about you and your business. And I tell you, it's your business as an American to be concerned about our freedoms. And I believe that our freedoms really do hang into balance. This is the only country in the world that I know of that sanctions the right to hate speech. You can find that in Article 1 of the First Amendment of the Constitution. And yet we have people who are having their hate speech being prohibited, being discriminated against in a governmental sort of way, in an institutional sort of way. And it's really a form of multicultural and political correct oppression. You know, meanwhile, while this oppression is taking place based on mob truth, we ignore absolute truths, which are important in maintaining a free society. The history of free societies have been linked to objective and absolute truths, and that is what made cultures work. And the absence of those is what made cultures fall apart and become really disasters, like we've seen throughout history. And it appears the United States is becoming one such culture. In 1987, there was a phenomenal book written called The Closing of the American Mind by Alan Bloom. The book profoundly affected my thought, and it's something that I revisit on occasion just to see how prophetic Bloom had become. And boy, had he ever. And I was delighted recently to stumble on a book that caught my eye called The State of the American Mind, which is an anthology of really some of the greatest minds out there, checking out where we are, where our status is as it pertains to the 1987 book. How far along are we in the closing of the American mind, if you will? Mark Bauerlen is our guest, our first guest. He is one of the two editors of the book. It is an anthology. A lot of different people contributed to the work, and I personally thought it was a very good book. I highly recommend it. It has all the problems that anthologies have with both quality of content varying somewhat, but I thought it was a very important book. And I like the fact that it is an anthology of work because it allows people with particular expertise to really focus on their areas of expertise. Mark, welcome to the program.
I'm glad to join you.
And sorry for the lengthy introduction, but there's a lot of background that came behind this book that I think the listener needed to be aware of.
Sure. And, you know, we do take off on Alan Bloom's The Closing of the American Mind in our title, The State of the American Mind. And one thing I would say about Bloom's book in relation to ours, Bloom was talking a lot about the college campus and the sort of unseriousness of the studies there and a little bit of the climbing political correctness back in the 1980s. We've got a few people writing about the college campus today, and I don't think even Bloom could have predicted that political correctness would have reached the point that it has reached on campus at this point. So that my colleagues, who are all very good, sensitive liberals, they're all scared. They're afraid of saying the wrong thing. They're afraid someone's going to catch them in making the wrong little joke. Someone's going to be offended, and if a charge is filed against them, it can ruin their lives for 6 months.
Mm-hmm. And it's becoming more and more common. It's so funny because these are the same liberals who have fueled this culture.
Exactly. And you find that a lot of them are being the ones who end up being targets of a Title IX claim. I mean, one thing we have to remember is we talk about political correctness on campus. A lot of this is really the way administrations are increasingly having to respond to pressure from the federal government. I mean, they're stuck with ever more stringent and absurd efforts to regulate student behavior, youth's behavior, because of new regulations that do come out of the federal government. And if you violate those regulations, you lose all your federal money. And universities, by and large, can't survive without the federal government at this point. So the pressure is on. And when you get a school inviting a speaker to campus and some group comes forward and says, we don't like this speaker, we are offended by what this speaker has to say, you either disinvite this person or we're going to disrupt it. That's frequent policy now on campus.
Right, and whatever professors who are behind inviting that campus, those are going to be under additional scrutiny going forward.
Indeed. And I mean, where we are now is, and this broadly applies to American culture overall, there are certain subjects that you just learn to avoid. You don't talk about race unless you do it in a highly scripted way. You don't talk about sexuality unless you follow a very specific party line on that. If you don't follow that party line, you are pilloried. You're attacked. You can find your job in jeopardy. And we certainly know what happens to people who try to insist upon what you mentioned a moment ago, the First Amendment, the first right listed, and that is to exercise your religious liberty. That's number one there in the First Amendment. That liberty is now constrained by new liberties imagined in the head of Justice Kennedy regarding anti-discrimination freedom issues.
Yeah, and these are all things that don't exist, not even implicitly, let alone explicitly in the Constitution. They're not there. They're made up freedoms. And this idea has been going on for a long time, of rule by court, and we're seeing more and more of that take place. I saw the total lack of reaction to the Supreme Court's decision on Obamacare, where there's nothing there provision-wise for these exchanges that essentially the court codified for the Congress because the Congress didn't do it for itself. That's called an oligarchy when that takes place. And
I'm afraid that
our population doesn't understand that. The people don't care because they weren't taught to care.
I'm afraid that we have 5 lawyers now setting legislative policy increasingly in this country, and many of these decisions don't even make a pretense of legal reasoning. It's really just about cultural trends and political pressure that is going on here. And it can only work if, first, we have a populace that is ignorant about its own country and its history and the civic principles behind it, or doesn't care.
Yeah, which I think
and there we have the bread and circuses condition, which do apply to most people today. I mean, the ignorance of U.S. history is vast. Every time the federal government issues its U.S. history exam to 12th graders in this country, more than half of them fail that test.
And that exam
do much better on the civics test.
And that exam is nothing of what it was just even 20 years ago, and it wasn't enough 20 years ago. It's getting dumber and dumber, as are the people who are taking it. It reminds you of the movie Idiocracy. We're moving in that direction. And frankly,
we're letting them think. We are letting college and high school students think that they're okay. I mean, in 1960, only 15% of all the grades given were A's. The majority were C's. Today, you know what I'm going to say, the vast majority of grades given, 43% more than any, well above any other grade, are A's. So, and they're doing less homework than they used to. So less work, less actual knowledge and skills, but we've raised the standard.
Yeah.
We've raised the grades for them so that they believe that
by lowering the standard. Yeah.
and the only people who are really complaining about this is for your listeners, businesses, human resources people who are screaming these days because they're getting college graduates with high GPAs. They interview them, they hire them, and they find that these kids, they can't read very well, they can't write very well, their numeracy skills are lacking, and they have a poor work ethic. They want to be on Facebook at their desks all day.
But they're perfect people for voting to keep the status quo in office.
Or they just don't vote.
Yeah, or they don't vote, which is even better. Even as they complain about them not voting, those in government, better still, let them be passive. Mark Bauerlen, he is our...
We end up with the leaders we deserve.
Mark, that's exactly right. Well, and of course, it's very romantic to me to think you can maintain a free society and having the government teach the people what a free society looks like. It's a very romantic notion. Mark Bauerlen, he's our guest. He's the co-editor of the book, The State of the American Mind. We're going to get into the chapters itself and talk much more with him right after the break. By the way, learn more about the book at stateoftheamericanmind.com. And this is The Price of Business.